I had exactly 3 rules for surviving life in the perpetually damp village of Thornfeld. Rule 1. Keep your head down. Rule 2. Do not cause problems for anyone with more teeth than you. Rule 3, and this one was etched into the marrow of my bones. Do not, under any circumstances, offer baked goods to the most feared werewolf monarch on the continent in place of a tax payment he could use to fund a small war. As it turned out, I was about to shatter all 3 before lunch, and my Monday had been going so well. You call this well? My wolf muttered from the back of my mind, where she spent most of her time lounging like a judgmental house cat. You burned the first batch of rolls, you stepped on a nail, and you've been stress-eating raw cookie dough since dawn. This is your version of a good day. I weep for us. I ignored her. My wolf, sharp-tongued, perpetually unimpressed, and entirely too honest, had been in a mood since we'd heard the news. She was also, infuriatingly, almost always right about everything, which made ignoring her both necessary and futile. The news was this. The Alpha King was coming. Not a herald, not a tax collector with ink-stained fingers and a bored expression. The man himself. Valdrin Greymane, Alpha King of the Iron Fang, a being whose legend was written in the blood of his enemies and the terrified silence of everyone else. He was coming to collect the annual tribute from the Northern Reach, a collection of border villages that included our own soggy little corner of the world. I had heard the stories. Everyone had. Valdrin Greymane, who had taken the throne at 19 after his father's death, who had unified 3 warring territories through a combination of strategic brilliance and the kind of focused, calculated violence that made other alphas reconsider their life choices. Who ruled with an iron hand inside a velvet glove that no one was foolish enough to test. In the hierarchy of the packs, every wolf had a place. Alphas led, betas strategized, deltas enforced. Gammas built the backbone, and omegas, my rank, held the emotional center. We were mediators, healers of the spaces between people. It was a respected role, ancient and necessary. An omega who could calm a raging alpha or soothe a grieving pack was worth their weight in silver. But respect for your rank and respect for your blood were 2 very different currencies, and mine bought nothing in the markets that mattered. I was common-born. No founding pack in my lineage, no ancient bloodline humming through my veins. My family had been bakers in Thornfeld for 4 generations. Good, honest, unremarkable people who made good, honest, unremarkable bread. In the grand tapestry of the Iron Fang Kingdom, we were not even a thread. We were the flower dust that settled on the loom. Poetic, my wolf drawled. Did you rehearse that, or does self-pity just flow naturally? The tribute this year was a problem. A late frost had killed half our wheat crop. Our village was expected to produce a sum that assumed a prosperous harvest we simply hadn't had. My share was 12 silver marks. I had 3. My bakery, the Kneading Heart, operated on a principle best described as aggressive optimism. I baked because I loved it, and I sold enough to keep the oven lit and the roof mostly waterproof. Profit was a concept I admired from a respectful distance. So, as the village gathered in the square and my best friend Dala vibrated with anxiety beside me, I did the only thing a desperate woman with an oven and a catastrophic deficit of self-preservation could do. I baked snickerdoodles. "This is your plan?" my wolf said flatly. "Cookies." Against the wolf who broke the granite fortress siege at 21 with 300 men. Cookies. "They're very good cookies," I whispered under my breath. "We're going to die delicious." What a legacy. The Alpha King arrived the way a thunderstorm arrives. You felt him before you saw him. Black carriages pulled by war horses the color of smoke, outriders in dark leather and polished steel, and flanking the central carriage, the Ashbourne Guard, Valdrin's personal elite, warriors who had sworn blood oaths to his line. The carriage door opened, and he stepped out. "Oh," my wolf said, in the voice of someone who has just walked into a wall. "Oh, that's not fair. That should be illegal. There should be a law against looking like that and also being in charge of things." He was tall, Not just tall, he was built on a scale that made the world around him feel slightly apologetic for its own proportions. Broad-shouldered, lean-waisted, moving with the kind of controlled economy that spoke of a body trained as a weapon long before it was dressed in a king's clothes. Dark hair, cut short at the sides, threaded with a single streak of gray at the temple, a mark, people said, that had appeared the night he took the throne. A scar bisected his left eyebrow, drawing the eye to a face that was less handsome than it was arresting, sharp-boned, hard-jawed, carved rather than born. And his eyes. A gray so pale they were almost silver and as warm as a winter river. He was 26 years old, king since 19, when his father had been killed in a border ambush that everyone called a tragedy and some whispered was a betrayal. He had defended the throne against 4 dominance challenges in his first year, each from wolves twice his age. None of them challenged him again. His beta stepped forward, a lean man with tired eyes and the posture of someone who had been perpetually bracing for impact since the day a 19-year-old boy had become his alpha. "The tribute," he announced flatly. Mayor Aldous, a man whose spine had apparently been an optional feature all along, managed a stammering half-sentence about hardship that trailed off into a wheeze. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. "Here it comes," my wolf said, and for once her voice was quiet. The part where power meets poverty, and poverty loses. And my brain, my wonderful, treasonous brain, chose that exact moment to say, "Well, no point letting good cookies go to waste." "Don't you dare," Dalla hissed, grabbing my sleeve. But I was already moving. "Oh, we're doing this," my wolf said. "We're actually doing the cookie thing. Bold. Stupid, but bold." For the record, I want it noted that I objected. When they write our obituary, make sure it says, "Her wolf was against this from the start." I walked through the crowd, which parted for me the way it does when someone is clearly making a terrible decision and no one wants to catch the shrapnel. I stopped close enough to catch his scent. Wood smoke and pine, and something deeper, like the earth after a storm. In my hands I held a tin, still warm. "Your Majesty?" My voice came out steady. Inside, every cell in my body was filing a formal complaint. His gaze dropped to me. Those silver eyes, up close, were full of the 1,000 calculations a king makes in every moment. I could feel the weight of a predatory intelligence far beyond his years pressed against my skin. I lifted the lid. Rows of snickerdoodles, cinnamon sugar dusted, still breathing warmth into the cold air. "We are a poor village," I said, and the words came from somewhere deeper than my fear. "The frost took our crops. We cannot pay what you've asked. But we are not without worth, and we are not without hospitality. So this is what I have. You can take it, or you can leave it. But these are the best snickerdoodles in the Northern Reach. And that is not nothing." The silence that followed could have housed a cathedral. "Brinna," my wolf whispered, her voice stripped of all its usual sarcasm. "Something is happening." He reached out, plucked a single cookie from the tin, examined it, took a bite. And his eyes, those pale winter river eyes, flashed gold. Not a subtle shift, a bright, molten, unmistakable gold that blazed for one searing second before the silver flooded back. Something crossed his face, fast and involuntary. His jaw tightened, his nostrils flared, and the perfect mask of the Alpha King cracked. He finished the cookie. Then he took the entire tin from my hands. His fingers brushed mine through the leather of his glove, and even through that barrier I felt it, a flare of warmth that shot up my arm and lodged beneath my sternum. "Oh," my wolf breathed. "Oh no." Valdrin looked at his beta. "The debt is forgiven." He turned and walked back to his carriage. The Ashbourne guard scrambled to follow, caught off balance for what was clearly the first time in their professional lives. 200 people stood in stunned silence, and I stood in the middle of them, holding an empty lid, my wolf whispering "oh no" on a loop, with absolutely no idea that my entire life had just detonated. The carriage door sealed out the world, and Valdrin sank onto the leather seat like a man who had just taken a blade between the ribs and was trying to determine the severity before anyone noticed. The tin of cookies sat in his lap. His hands were not shaking, because the Alpha King's hands did not shake. They were, however, maintaining their stillness through what could only be described as an act of sovereign will. His wolf, a presence that usually occupied his mind the way a general occupies a war room, with authority and strategic calm, had abandoned all pretense of composure. Mate. The word thundered through his skull with the force of a decree. That woman is our mate. The moon goddess has spoken, and she has chosen well. Did you taste that cookie? That is the cookie of our future queen. We must return immediately and formally present ourselves. I believe the traditional offering is a fresh kill, but given her profession, perhaps a sack of premium flour would be more appropriate. Jorik. Jorik, where does one acquire premium flour? Jorik cannot hear you, Valdrin said through gritted teeth. Then relay the question. This is time-sensitive. Flour has a shelf life. Sir? Jorik's voice, from the opposite seat, carried the carefully measured tone of a man who could hear only one side of an internal conversation, but could infer the rest from the expression on his alpha's face. Valdrin rearranged his features into something approximating composure. It felt like trying to fold a fitted sheet. Technically possible, practically absurd. What is it, Jorik? The debt, sir. You forgave the entire Northern Reach tribute, the full amount, for a tin of... It was a strategic gesture of goodwill, Valdrin said. The words tasted like chalk. Goodwill, his wolf scoffed. We would have forgiven the debt of the entire kingdom for a second cookie. Tell Jorik the truth. Tell him we have found our mate, and the campaign begins now. Strategic goodwill, Jorik repeated slowly, valued at approximately 6,000 gold crowns. Enough to outfit 2 new border legions. He paused. For snickerdoodles. The border villages have been under economic strain. Demonstrating mercy strengthens loyalty. It is sound governance. Sound governance, his wolf repeated with magnificent disdain. We wanted to lay our cloak on the ground so she wouldn't have to stand in the mud. That is not governance. That is a 26-year-old king brought to his knees by a woman with flour on her nose and more courage than half our war council combined. Jorik leaned forward. Sir, with all respect, your eyes turned gold. The entire Ashbourne Guard saw it. Commander Solvay served your father for 20 years before she served you, and I watched the color leave her face. You looked at that girl the way cartographers look at undiscovered continents. Valdrin's jaw tightened. He pried the lid off the tin, took another cookie, ate it in 2 precise bites. The taste settled into his chest like an anchor finding the ocean floor. Acceptable, his wolf pronounced. Not as satisfying as her presence, but acceptable. We are rationing these. They are sacred provisions. It was a good cookie, Valdrin said quietly, staring at the tin. Jorik closed his eyes for a moment, the long exhale of a man recalibrating his entire week. Of course it was, sir. A kingdom-altering cookie. The treasury will be thrilled. The ache was immediate and irrational. He had spoken to her for less than 2 minutes. He did not know her name. And yet the growing distance felt like a hook behind his ribs, pulling. His wolf spoke with the composed authority of a field marshal. The bakery, her oven. It appeared structurally questionable. As sovereign, we have a duty to ensure the safety of critical infrastructure in border settlements. We should return and conduct a thorough personal assessment. Valdrin blinked. It was, objectively, the most transparent excuse in the history of the Iron Fang monarchy. Jorik, her oven. A beat of silence. Her oven, sir? It appeared unsound, potentially hazardous, a fire risk to the village. We need to turn around. I will conduct a personal inspection. Jorik stared at him, then looked out the window, then looked back. An oven inspection by the Alpha King, who has never once inspected an oven in 7 years of rule. There is a first time for everything. Are you questioning my authority? Never, sir. Merely your reasoning. But he was already reaching for the hatch to signal the driver. I was elbow deep in a flower explosion when the Alpha King walked back into my life. The flour sack had a hole. A previously undetected, strategically placed hole that revealed itself in a spectacular white detonation. I was coated. The counter was coated. My cat Millet was sitting on a stool looking personally victimized. The most powerful man on the continent is standing in our shop, and we look like we lost a fight with a cloud. I spent all morning telling you to wash your hair. Did you listen? You did not. I hope you're happy. The bell above my door chimed, and there he was. He had shed the armor and cloak, simple black tunic and trousers that did absolutely nothing to hide the sheer, architectural fact of him. He filled my doorway the way a cathedral fills a skyline. Behind him, Jorik stood slightly to the left, his face arranged in an expression of such studied blankness that it circled back around to being eloquent. Your Majesty, I managed, my voice at a pitch best described as mouse in formal wear. I attempted a curtsy on the flour-slicked floor. My foot slid. I grabbed the counter, and a bowl of sugar shattered on the flagstone. Valdrin moved. One step forward, hand extending, a reflex fast and instinctive. Then he caught himself and pulled back with the controlled precision of a man diffusing something delicate. The oven, he said, his voice rougher than the situation warranted. I am here to inspect it. I looked at my oven. A brick and iron monument that had survived floods, 2 minor earthquakes, and my early experiments with sourdough. It was the most structurally sound object in my entire life. He came back to inspect our oven, my wolf said slowly. The man who personally approved the engineering plans for the iron bridge. He wants to inspect our oven. Brinna, are you understanding what is happening here? It's fine, I offered. Old but reliable. It's outlasted 3 roofs. He moved past me into the kitchen, and the space contracted to the size of a heartbeat. He circled the oven, crouched to peer at the firebox, ran a hand along the brickwork. In my tiny kitchen, he looked like someone had placed a warship inside a bathtub. He's actually inspecting it, my wolf said, bewildered. He's genuinely examining the brickwork. I cannot tell if this is the most elaborate courtship strategy in history, or if this man sincerely cares about oven safety. Both options are terrifying. The mortar between the 3rd and 4th course shows minor calcium deposits, he said, and I realized with a start that he actually knew what he was looking at. How often do you reseal the flue? Every autumn, I said, caught off guard by the technical specificity. Good. Then his gaze drifted to the cooling rack, where leftover snickerdoodles sat. His train of thought visibly derailed. The spices, what did you use? Cinnamon, nutmeg, and a secret ingredient. His eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but with genuine interest that transformed his face. Secret ingredient? I leaned in. A second, larger amount of cinnamon. The corner of his mouth twitched. He caught it, disciplined it back into his jaw, but it had happened, and I had seen it. He almost smiled, my wolf whispered, her voice strange. 7 years of being king and everyone around him is terrified, and we almost made him smile with a baking joke. What is happening to us? Then, reaching for a wooden spoon at the same moment he brushed past it, our fingers met. Skin to skin, no glove. The world detonated. A current, deep, warm, alive, surged from the point of contact and flooded through me. My wolf howled, a sound that was not pain, not fear, but recognition, raw and primal. Valdrin pulled back. His eyes blazed gold for 2 full seconds before the silver reclaimed them. His hand curled into a fist at his side. The inspection is complete, he said, his voice strained at the edges. The oven is adequate. He left with a purposefulness that bordered on escape. That was a mate bond, my wolf said. The moon goddess just dropped the biggest complication in the history of complications into our lap, and we are standing here covered in flour like a sentient biscuit. The aftermath unfolded with the inevitability of a landslide. Valdrin told Jorik in the carriage on the way back. Jorik listened, nodded slowly, and said, with the air of a man who had accepted that his life would never be simple, "The council will resist. Your mother will wage war. And the common-born baker will be a political grenade with a very short fuse." Your point? My point is that we should probably have a plan before you walk into the council chamber and announce you found your mate in a border village known primarily for its mildew problem. Valdrin did not have a plan. He had a wolf that was still composing poetry about the color of her eyes. Honey, but with depth, like amber with sunlight trapped inside. We should commission a painting. And a bone-deep certainty that defied strategy. He walked into the council chamber and detonated the situation anyway. The 5 elders were already seated, their faces etched with varying degrees of consternation. Elder Theron, whose face resembled a weathered cliff, began without pleasantries. "We have received word of a most unusual exercise of royal clemency." "The border villages were under economic distress," Valdrin said, taking his seat. "The northern reach has been loyal to the Grey Main Line for generations. A measured act of clemency reinforces that loyalty." Elder Saren, who had the sharpest political mind in the kingdom and used it primarily to find fault, sniffed. "We are told the display was prompted by a confection." Before Valdrin could respond, the chamber doors opened. His mother, Merenth Greymane, striking, iron-willed, dark-haired with a streak of iron gray, entered the way weather enters a room. She had ruled as regent for 3 years after Valdrin's father had been killed in the border ambush, holding the throne with political ruthlessness and sheer will until her son was old enough to claim it. She had never quite released her grip on the power she'd been asked to return. "My son." Her voice was cool, precise, carrying a lifetime of practice at making simple words feel like judgments. "Mother, I wasn't aware you'd be joining us." "When the crown makes decisions that defy strategic logic, I make myself available." Her pale gray eyes swept the room and settled on him. 6,000 gold crowns. For pastry. "Have you lost your mind?" "Tell her," his wolf said. "She is the queen mother, not the queen. The mate bond is ours. She will oppose it. Let her." "It is none of your concern." Merenth inhaled, slowly, deliberately, and went very still. "You smell of flour, and cinnamon, and a common-born wolf." Her expression cycled through surprise, realization, and something that looked, just for a moment, like old pain, before it hardened into steel. "Don't tell me this is a bond." "The baker's name is Brinna," Valdrin said, cutting through the elders' murmurs. "Her skill is exceptional. I am commissioning her to oversee the desserts for the solstice ball. She will be given lodging at the castle and full access to the kitchens." "Valdrin, I have spent 3 years securing the Sylvain alliance. Lady Revka's father holds the only trade route to the southern coast. Without that pass, our economy contracts by 1/3. She is high-born, wolf-blooded, politically necessary. You will not dismantle that for a woman you met for 5 minutes." "I understand the cost of what you gave, Mother," Valdrin said, his voice firm, but not unkind. "But the kingdom you held together for me. I am going to build something better with it, not by repeating the same sacrifices and calling them duty." Something flickered in her eyes. Not softening, not yet, but a fracture in the ice. She left without another word, her spine rigid, her silence louder than any argument. The royal decree arrived on parchment so fine it was practically translucent. Jorik delivered it with the demeanor of a man delivering a diagnosis. I read it twice, then held it up to the light, checking for hidden messages like, "Just kidding." "Ma'am," my wolf repeated when Jorik called me that. The beta of the Iron Fang just called us ma'am. The man who helped plan the siege of Harrogate. I need a moment. "He's bringing you to the castle," Dalla said, grinning. "This is a courtship. This is a commission, baking, for a ball." "It's a courtship," my wolf said flatly. He's constructing a pretense to keep us nearby because he's too kingly to just say, "I can't stop thinking about you. Please come live in my castle." So he's doing it through pastry. It's actually kind of brilliant, in a pathetic way. He's the alpha king, Dala. I make muffins for lumberjacks. The fanciest thing I've ever made is a 3-layer cake for Mayor Aldis's name day, and it leaned. It leaned with character. It leaned with gravity. But a royal commission was not a suggestion, and my wolf, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since the cookie incident, chose this moment to speak up. Also, she added, her voice carefully casual, we've been feeling the pull for 3 days. Don't pretend you haven't. That ache in your chest that won't go away, that restlessness at night, that's the bond, and it's only going to get worse the longer we stay away from him. So you can either go to the castle and face this, or you can stay here and slowly lose your mind. Your call. I packed my favorite apron, my lucky whisk, and a small pouch of my grandmother's spice blend, cinnamon, nutmeg, and cardamom, in a ratio I'd never shared with anyone. The journey to the capital took a full day by carriage. A carriage, I noted, that was nicer than my entire cottage. I spent most of it staring out the window, watching the landscape shift from the damp woods of Thornfeld to open farmland, then to the rising stone sprawl of Waldron's seat of power. The journey to the capital took a full day by carriage. A carriage, I noted, that was nicer than my entire cottage. The iron hold rose from the earth like the spine of some buried titan, dark stone and sharp angles built into a massive granite cliff face. Towers climbed into the clouds. It was not beautiful, it was formidable, and it made no apology for the distinction. My bakery could fit in its gatehouse. As we passed through the outer walls, the strangest thing began to happen. Guards, massive battle-hardened warriors in dark steel, stopped, stared, and bowed. Full, formal, fist-over-heart bows, the kind reserved for visiting dignitaries and pack leaders. Not for common-born Omega bakers from nowhere. They know, my wolf said softly. Word has spread. The king's mate is coming. That's us, Brenna. They're bowing to us. They're making a mistake, I whispered. They're making a decision. There's a difference. One guard, an enormous man whose beard could have housed a family of sparrows, spotted me carrying my own sack of specialty flour. He looked physically pained. He strode over, took it from me with both hands, and carried it like a chest of crown jewels. "Allow me, ma'am," he mumbled, his face the color of a ripe tomato. I was escorted not to servants' quarters, but to a suite of rooms on the 3rd floor of the East Tower. Warm stone, tapestries of wolves beneath silver moons, a 4-poster bed larger than my kitchen. And adjacent to the suite, connected by an interior door, was a kitchen. My kitchen. Built for me. Counters the right height. A perfect oven of iron and fire brick. Every ingredient imaginable. Common flour and rare spices, vanilla from the southern islands, chocolate from beyond the western sea. A small window above the work counter let in the afternoon light. Someone had paid attention. Not just to what a kitchen needed, but to what I needed. The whisk rack, the flour bins within arm's reach, the herb garden on the windowsill. "I'm not going to say I told you so," my wolf said quietly, "but I am going to sit here and feel extremely validated in silence." And so began the most terrifying, exhilarating, and flower-covered chapter of my life. The man was a disaster, a magnificent, devastating disaster, and I had a front-row seat. Waldron began a series of kingly check-ins on the dessert preparations. What they actually were, as observed by me, Jorik, and an increasingly entertained kitchen staff, was the slow public unraveling of the most powerful wolf in the known world. He would appear in my kitchen doorway, always in the doorway, never crossing uninvited. Arms folded, deploying what I'd come to think of as his official assessment expression. It was the face of a man who had rehearsed looking authoritative, and was now deploying it with military precision. "I am here to review the progress of the dessert preparations," he'd announce, as if this were a matter of national security, and not an excuse to watch me pipe cream into a shoe bun. "Liar," my wolf would say, with great relish. Absolute, shameless, majestic liar. He's memorized our schedule. He knows exactly when we're working on the pastry cream because he always shows up for pastry cream. One morning he arrived during a particularly aggressive phase of bread kneading. "You seem," he said carefully, "to be punishing that bread. The dough needs to develop gluten structure." "Is the gluten structure resistant?" "The gluten structure is being uncooperative, and it knows what it did." He blinked, then looked at Jorik by the door, and some silent communication passed between them that clearly meant do not ask follow-up questions about the bread. "He has no idea what gluten is," my wolf observed from her position of amused superiority. "He commands armies and negotiates treaties, and he has absolutely no idea what gluten is. This is the best day of my life." Another time, he tried to help carry a tray of cooled tartlet shells. His hands, trained for swords and government, had apparently never encountered the concept of a delicate pastry. He gripped the tray with combat force. 3 shells cracked under his fingers. He stared at the broken shells with such genuine, bewildered guilt that I had to bite my cheek. "I will replace these," he said gravely. "They cost about half a copper." "I will replace them," he repeated, as if the crime were unforgivable. "He broke our tartlets and he looks like he needs to lie down," my wolf wheezed. "This man sieged a fortress. He just destroyed 3 pastry cups and he thinks he's committed treason." But here was the thing that slowly, dangerously, cracked through my defenses. He wasn't pretending to be interested. He actually was. And I noticed, because noticing had become an involuntary reflex, that he was different in my kitchen than anywhere else in the castle. Quieter, stiller, as if the constant vigilance that being Alpha King required could, in this small, warm, flour-dusted space, be set down for a few minutes like a heavy coat. I learned things about him in fragments, the way you learn the shape of a landscape by walking through it. He drank his tea black. He read military history before bed, but kept a volume of poetry on the same shelf. And when I teased him about it, the flush that crept up his neck was worth more than the kingdom's treasury. He had a scar on his right hand, from his second dominance challenge at 20, and he flexed it unconsciously when thinking hard. He brought me things. Not jewels. Things that said he'd been paying attention. A jar of honey from the southern orchards, because I'd mentioned my grandmother used it. A book on the history of Thornfeld, because I'd said I wished I knew more about where I came from. A small clay pot of basil, the exact variety I'd been trying to grow, placed on my counter without a word, while he pretended to inspect the flour bins. "He is courting us with herbs," my wolf observed, trying to sound unimpressed and failing. "Herb-based courtship. This is either the most romantic or the most pathetic thing I've ever witnessed, and I genuinely cannot tell which." One afternoon, the visits produced a moment that changed things. "Why does the temperature matter?" he asked, watching me monitor a pot of caramel with the focus of a woman diffusing a rune trap. "Sugar is sugar." "Sugar is a promise," I said, not looking up. "At low heat, it's sweet and simple. At medium, it develops complexity. At high heat, it becomes something else entirely, bitter, dark, and if you push it too far, it burns, and you can't undo it." I looked up and found him watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Something open, something startled. "That sounds," he said slowly, "like it applies to more than sugar." I held his gaze and something shifted between us, wordless and electric. A recognition that we were both talking about the same thing, and neither of us was ready to say so. "Smooth," my wolf said, grudgingly impressed. "Very smooth. For a king who spent 7 years scaring grown men into submission. B+ material." One evening, 12 days before the ball, the stress caught me. I was attempting my 5th chocolate mousse. The first 4 had been soup, more soup, oddly gritty soup, and something I could only describe as chocolate-flavored despair. I sat on a stool, pressed my flour-dusted hands over my face, and did not cry. I did not cry because I was a professional, and professionals did not cry over emulsification failures, even when those failures were going to be served to 300 of the most powerful wolves on the continent. "You're allowed to cry," my wolf said, and her voice was uncharacteristically gentle. "You've been working 18-hour days. You haven't slept properly because the bond ache keeps waking you up. You're allowed to not be okay." The door opened. Heavy, careful footsteps. "Go away," I mumbled. "The moose has won. I am issuing a formal surrender." A large, warm hand settled on my shoulder. I looked up into Valdrin's gray eyes. No guards, no pretense. His tunic was unlaced at the throat, his hair slightly disheveled, as if he'd come here from his own long day without stopping to put the king back on. "It is Moose," he said softly. "It does not outrank you." I let out a sound half laugh, half something dangerously close to a sob. Tell that to the 5 bowls of chocolate failure in your sink. Without a word, he dampened a towel and gently wiped a smear of chocolate from my cheek. His touch was hesitant, incredibly careful, as if handling something precious. The air grew thick and warm. "Why did you bring me here?" I whispered. His hand stilled against my cheek. His thumb traced a line along my jaw, and I felt the tremor in it. A fine, barely perceptible vibration that told me the great Alpha King's hand was not, in this moment, entirely steady. "The official reason is your skill." He met my eyes with a raw vulnerability that looked like it cost him everything. "The real reason is that since my father died, I have built my entire life out of walls and strategy and necessary distance. I became the king at 19, and I have not stopped being the king for a single moment since. And then you stood in front of me with a tin of cookies, and every wall I have ever built felt, for the first time, like a prison. I spent my whole life making myself small enough to fit a life that was never meant to hold me," I said, and the words surprised me, coming from a place I usually kept locked. "And now you're asking me to step into the biggest life there is, and I don't know if I can fill it." He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw a man who understood exactly what it meant to live inside a shape that wasn't quite yours. "You don't have to fill it," he said. "You just have to be in it. That is enough. You are enough." "I'm going to pretend I'm not emotional right now," my wolf said, her voice thick. "This is not affecting me. I am a hardened, sarcastic wolf, and I do not have feelings about this." She absolutely had feelings about this. So did I. He left soon after, returning to whatever duty had next claim on his time. But the warmth of his hand on my cheek lingered like a brand, and in the quiet of my kitchen, surrounded by 5 failed mooses, I realized something that terrified me more than any king or kingdom. I was falling, and I didn't know how to stop. Lady Revka Sylvain arrived 3 days before the ball, and she arrived the way a blade arrives, sharp end first. She was striking, dark hair swept into an elaborate arrangement, green eyes the color of deep forest shade, and a face that managed to be beautiful and cutting simultaneously. Her gown was silver white, fitted like armor. She had been promised to Valdrin since her father secured the Sylvain Pass trade negotiations 3 years ago. She found me in my kitchen on her second day, which told me she'd been looking. "So, you're the baker." "And you're the alliance," I said, not unkindly, just factually. Something flickered in her green eyes. Surprise, maybe, that I'd cut straight to it. "I am Lady Revka of the Sylvain Pack. My bloodline stretches back, I know who you are. Your father controls the Sylvain Pass. The match has been in negotiation for 3 years. You're not here because of romance. You're here because of economics." "Told you," my wolf said, stretching lazily. We're smarter than she expected. They always underestimate the baker. It's the flour, makes people think we're soft. You are remarkably well informed for a village omega. I read, and Jorik talks when he's tired. I offered a palmier. Would you like one? They're good. Butter and patience, mostly. She didn't take it. But she didn't sneer either. And in that gap, I saw the first crack in the performance. "Do you know what it's like?" she said, her voice quieter, stripped of its performance edge. "To be shaped your entire life for one purpose? To be told since childhood that your worth is measured in the alliance your bond will secure. And then to arrive and discover that purpose has been given to someone else? Not because you failed, but because fate decided to intervene?" I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see the rival. I saw a woman standing in a role she hadn't chosen either. "That sounds lonely," I said. She flinched, almost imperceptibly. "Don't pity me." "I'm not. I'm recognizing something I understand. Take the cookie, Revka. It's not a treaty. It's just butter." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she took it, bit into it, chewed slowly. "It's good," she admitted, as if the words cost her. "I know." That, my wolf said after Revka left, was a woman who just realized the enemy she came to destroy is not actually her enemy. Give her time. She'll figure out what to do with that. The same night, Jorg appeared in my kitchen, looking more exhausted than usual, which was saying something. "Lord Dravith of the Ashenmore Pack has sent a formal objection to the council," he said, accepting the cup of tea I pressed into his hands. "He's calling Valdrin's decision to forgive the Northern Reach tribute a sign of emotional compromise. He's framing the mate bond as a threat to the stability of the alliance structure." "Dravith isn't stupid," my wolf said with uncharacteristic gravity. "He doesn't want the throne, he wants concessions. He's using us as leverage. If Valdrin backs down, Dravith claims he corrected the king. If Valdrin holds firm, Dravith forces a public reckoning. Either way, he wins status." "What happens in a challenge?" Jorg set down his tea. "Valdrin would win. He's the strongest alpha in generations. 4 challenges in his first year. 4 clean victories. But winning a dominance challenge against one of his own lords, it fractures the kingdom, regardless of the outcome. So my existence is destabilizing the entire political structure of the Iron Fang? Your existence is revealing fractures that were already there. Dravith has been pushing boundaries for years. You've given him a convenient excuse." "Not our fault," my wolf said firmly. "We didn't ask the moon goddess to make the Alpha King our mate. We were perfectly happy making snickerdoodles and arguing with Millet about counterspace." I sat with this long after Jorg left. The weight of it, that every moment Valdrin spent near me was ammunition for his enemies, settled over me like a second skin. The question that kept me awake. What happened when the thing you wanted most was the same thing that could hurt him most? "We don't run," my wolf said in the dark, fierce and certain. "Running is what would make their story true, that we're too small for this." But my wolf was wrong. Sometimes the bravest thing wasn't standing still. Sometimes it was stepping back, so the person you loved had room to survive. I lay in the dark and thought about Dravith, about the council shifting like sand beneath Valdrin's feet, about Marenth, who had built her entire life around an alliance strategy that I was single-handedly dismantling by existing. Every day Valdrin chose me, the cost went up. And he would keep choosing me. I knew that with the bone-deep certainty of the bond. He would keep choosing me even if it burned his kingdom down around him, because that was who he was. He would sacrifice everything before he sacrificed the bond, which meant the only person who could protect him from that sacrifice was me. I got up. I packed my bag, quietly, carefully, in the dark. My apron, my whisk, the pouch of grandmother's spice blend. I left the beautiful kitchen with its perfect oven and its herb garden on the windowsill. I left the rooms that had been built to hold me. I didn't write a note, because a note would give him something to argue with, and I couldn't afford to hear his arguments. They were too good, and I was too weak for them. "What are you doing?" my wolf asked, and her voice was sharp with alarm. "Brinna, what are you doing?" "The right thing." "The right thing? The right thing is sneaking away in the middle of the night like a thief? Without telling him? Without even giving him the chance to—" "He'll argue. He'll convince me to stay. and then Draveth will have his weapon, and the council will fracture, and it will be my fault. It won't be your fault. It will be Draveth's fault. It will be the council's fault. It will be the fault of a system that values bloodlines over people. Why do you keep taking blame that doesn't belong to you? I made it as far as the courtyard. Going somewhere? His voice hit me like a wall. Not loud, quiet, controlled, and laced with a fury I had never heard from him before. He was standing in the shadow of the eastern archway, arms crossed, still fully dressed at 2 a.m. He hadn't been sleeping either. He knew, my wolf said. He felt us through the bond. Of course he felt us. I tried to tell you this was a terrible plan, but you never listened to me. You never. I turned to face him. His eyes were silver fire in the darkness, and the mask was gone. What was underneath was a man who was angry. Not disappointed, not hurt. Angry. Were you going to tell me? He said, each word precise. Or was I going to wake up to an empty kitchen and a cold bond and have to figure it out myself? I was going to... What? Vanish? Decide for both of us that this was too hard, too dangerous, too inconvenient for my kingdom? He stepped closer, and I could feel his wolf pressing against the surface, barely leashed. You were going to leave me, Brenna, without a word, without giving me the choice to fight for this. I was trying to protect you. The words tore out of me, raw and ragged. Draveth is building a case against you. Your mother wants me gone. Every day I'm here, I'm giving your enemies exactly what they need to tear you apart. I'm not protecting myself, I'm protecting you. I don't need your protection. His voice cracked on the last word, and the crack undid something in both of us. He ran a hand through his hair, paced 2 steps away, then turned back. When he spoke again, the anger was still there, but it was threaded with something rawer. I have defended this throne since I was 19 years old. I have fought wolves twice my size, held together alliances built on sand, and buried my own father. I can handle Draveth. I can handle the council. What I cannot handle, his voice dropped. What I cannot handle is you deciding that I'm not strong enough to choose you. Because that's what this is. You're not leaving to protect me. You're leaving because you don't believe I'll still choose you when it gets hard. The words landed like a blade between my ribs, because they were true. Underneath all the noble justifications, underneath the selfless sacrifice narrative, was the same old wound. The belief that I was not worth the cost. That eventually, inevitably, he would look at the price of loving me and decide it was too high. He's right, my wolf said quietly, and you know it. That's not, it is. He was close now, close enough that I could see the pulse jumping in his throat. I know what you believe about yourself. I know you think you're too small for this, too common, too easy to discard. But when you sneak away in the middle of the night, you're not just running from the court. You're making the choice for me. And no one, not Draveth, not my mother, not the moon goddess herself, gets to make that choice but me. My throat burned. And what about my choice? What about the fact that loving someone means being willing to let them go if staying will destroy them? Loving someone means being willing to stay and fight, even when it's terrifying. His voice was raw now, stripped of anger, just honest. It means trusting the other person to know what they can carry. You don't get to decide my limits for me, Brenna. Not even out of love. Especially not out of love. We stood there in the dark courtyard, the silence broken only by the distant night watch and the hammering of my own heart. I wasn't afraid of being too small for his world. I was afraid that I mattered enough to break it. I'm scared, I whispered. The most honest thing I'd ever said. His anger dissolved, not slowly, all at once, like a wave pulling back. He closed the distance in one step and pulled me against his chest, his arms wrapping around me with a fierceness that was less king and all man. I know, he said into my hair. So am I. But you don't get to leave without telling me. Not ever. We fight this together, or we don't fight it at all. Deal? I pressed my face into his chest, breathed in wood smoke and pine, and let go of something I'd been carrying since before I could remember. Deal, I whispered. Finally, my wolf said, her voice rough. An actual conversation instead of running.
I've only been suggesting this for weeks. But sure, do it the dramatic way at 2 a.m. in a courtyard. That works too. We stood there for a long time, in the dark, holding on to each other like the world might tip sideways if we let go. His chin rested on the top of my head. My face was pressed against his chest, where I could feel the steady drum of his heartbeat. A sound that had become, without my permission, the most grounding thing in my universe. For the record, I said, my voice muffled against his tunic, your courtship strategy is terrible. Oven inspections, tartlet massacres, the entire truth gas debacle. I am aware. The herbs were nice, though. The herbs were deliberate. The basil was the right variety. I asked your friend Dala. She was enthusiastic in her assistance. I pulled back and stared at him. You talked to Dala? Behind my back? I sent Jorik. He found it deeply humiliating. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. She gave him a list, with annotations. A pause. And a diagram. Dala made a courtship diagram, my wolf said, with undisguised delight. I love that woman. She is our people. I laughed, a real laugh, the first one in what felt like days, and it echoed through the empty courtyard, and his arms tightened around me, and I thought, this is what it feels like when the walls come down and you don't die. You just breathe. Jorik found them the next morning in the private kitchen. Brinna was making breakfast, pancakes from the smell of it, and Valdrin was sitting at the counter with a cup of tea, watching her with an expression that was simultaneously alert, contented, and faintly bewildered, like a man who had woken up in a world that was better than the one he'd gone to sleep in and was waiting for the catch. You look different, Jorik said carefully, settling into a chair. I look the same, Valdrin said. You look like someone who slept for the first time in 2 weeks. It's alarming. I'm not used to you looking rested. It makes me nervous. Brinna slid a plate of pancakes across the counter to Jorik. He stared at them, then at her, then at Valdrin. She tried to leave last night, Valdrin said, his voice calm. Jorik's eyes widened. I caught her in the courtyard. We had a conversation. A conversation, Jorik repeated. At 2 a.m, in the courtyard. Tell him it was productive, Valdrin's wolf suggested, and that we handled it with the authority and emotional intelligence befitting our station. It was productive, Valdrin said. Brinna snorted. He yelled at me and I yelled at him, and then we cried, and now we're having pancakes. Jorik looked between them for a long moment. Then he picked up his fork, cut into a pancake, and said, This is the healthiest relationship anyone in this castle has had in a generation. That is genuinely depressing. These pancakes, however, are excellent. Jorik, Valdrin said. Dravith, before the ball. Jorik nodded, his demeanor shifting. I've arranged the private meeting. He wants the trade council seat and grazing rights in the Ashenmoor lowlands. Give him both. It costs us nothing structurally and removes his pretext. That's remarkably pragmatic. Your wolf isn't objecting? I have been overruled by the strategic wisdom of a woman who makes pancakes, Valdrin's wolf said, with the dignified tone of a general accepting a superior battle plan. The courtship takes priority over territorial posturing. Dravith receives his concessions. We secure peace. And then we focus on what matters. My wolf has been overruled by pancakes, Valdrin translated. I see, Jorik said, eating another bite. Sir, with respect, these pancakes might be the best thing that's ever happened to this kingdom's foreign policy. The solstice ball arrived like a reckoning dressed in candlelight. I had done it. 2 weeks of work, 18-hour days, 5 near breakdowns, and 1 spectacular argument with Master Aldrich about whether vanilla extract was superior to vanilla bean. It was bean, and I would die on that hill. Cream puff towers with spun sugar crowns, conquered chocolate mousse with gold leaf,
miniature cheesecakes with berry coulis that caught the candlelight like liquid rubies, and 300 snickerdoodles, because some things should not be elevated beyond what they are. A maid named Hetty arrived with a gown the color of deep twilight, midnight blue, shimmering with silver threads like scattered stars. "Put the dress on and stop being a coward," my wolf said. "Your pep talks need work." "My pep talks are keeping you upright. You're welcome." I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back had cheekbones. I had never previously been aware of having cheekbones. We should wear things not covered in flour more often. This is a revelation. I have chocolate under my fingernails. Nobody's perfect. The grand ballroom of the Ironhold was a cathedral of stone and fire. Vaulted ceilings vanished into shadow. Hundreds of candles blazed in iron chandeliers, casting everything in warm gold. An orchestra played from a gallery above, and everywhere wolves, pack lords and ladies, diplomats, warriors, in their finest, the air thick with perfume and politics. I stood by a pillar near the entrance, trying to look like I was observing with casual elegance and not using the stonework for structural support. And Valdrin, on the raised dais at the far end, black formal tunic, silver thread at the collar and cuffs, the same silver stars that dusted my dress, a detail that made my pulse stutter. He looked carved from shadow and authority, every inch the Alpha King, and every inch miserable. When his eyes found me, the frown vanished. A palpable wave of relief washed over his features, so obvious that the Duchess standing next to me noticed and gave me a speculative look. The first dance. As Alpha King, tradition demanded he open the floor with a high-ranking partner. Revka stepped into his arms, looking stunning in a gown of deep green. I watched them move together, and I would be lying if I said it didn't hurt. They looked right. Two high-born wolves, matched in grace and bearing. The court murmured approval. Marenth, on the dais, allowed herself a thin smile. "They look like a painting," my wolf said quietly. "The kind that hangs in a hallway where no one lives." When the music ended, Revka said something only he could hear. I learned later what it was. "Go, before you bore us both to death." He stepped back, turned, and walked directly through the parting crowd, toward me. Every eye in the ballroom followed him, the whispers built like wind through dry grass. He stopped in front of me, and the noise and light and pressure of the room collapsed to the small space between us. "I need you to know that if you trip right now in front of all these people, I will hold it against you for the rest of our natural life." "Brenna," he said, and my name in his mouth was something new, warmer and more dangerous than it had ever been before. "May I have this dance?" I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and steady, and he led me to the center of the floor as the orchestra began a slow, ancient melody. He pulled me close, one hand on the small of my back, and we moved. I couldn't dance, not the way these people danced, with their generations of training. But Valdrin led with such quiet authority that following felt like breathing. "I have held kingdoms together with my bare hands," he murmured, his lips near my ear, his voice for me alone. I was not prepared for the weight of wanting someone I cannot command to stay. "You can't command me to stay," I whispered, "but you could ask." His hand tightened on my back, his forehead rested against mine, a gesture so intimate the ballroom might as well have been empty. "I am asking," he said, and then the moonlight came. The solstice rite was the oldest ceremony in the Iron Fang tradition. On the longest night, the great skylights were opened, and the full moon's light flooded the chamber, a blessing from the moon goddess, a renewal of the pack's bond with the divine. Someone had tampered with it. The moonlight that poured through the opened skylights was warm, almost amber, carrying a sweet, cloying scent, a compulsion. Ancient magic, the kind that hadn't been used in centuries, woven into the very light. I felt it hit me like a wave of warm water, a loosening in my chest, a dissolving of every filter between thought and speech. Around the ballroom, the effect was immediate and spectacular. A duchess turned to her husband and announced, with perfect clarity,
Your brother is a better dancer and a better conversationalist, and I have thought so for 40 years. An elder confessed to watering the ceremonial wine for years. A junior advisor told Elder Theron his breath smelled like pickled herring, and everyone was too afraid to mention it. Jorik, gripping a pillar, muttered through clenched teeth, I think about resigning every single morning. I make a list of reasons to stay. It used to be long. Now it just says, someone has to. He looked at Valdrin with an expression of betrayed horror at what had just come out of his own mouth. Revka gasped and pressed her hand to her mouth. I don't want to be queen. I have never wanted to be queen. I wanted to be a lore keeper. But my father said my voice was worth less than my bloodline, and I believed him. Brinna, my wolf said, and her voice was strained, fighting the compulsion herself. I'm holding it. I'm holding it, but it's strong. If it breaks through us, I swear to the goddess, if I end up confessing how many times I've fantasized about biting Elder Theron's ankles, I will never forgive you for bringing us to this ball. Merenth, on the dais, had gone very still. Because this was her doing. She had woven the compulsion into the moonlight, intending it for me, to make me confess my doubts and unworthiness in front of the court. But compulsion magic doesn't discriminate. It floods a room like water. Valdrin had gone rigid beside me. I could feel his body fighting it, years of iron discipline, of keeping the king and the man in separate rooms. His jaw was locked, his hands clenched. He fought it longer than anyone. Long enough to push me behind him, shielding me with his body. Long enough to signal Yorick. But not long enough. He turned to me, his eyes blazing gold, his expression a war between horror and honesty, and said, You are the only person who has ever made me feel like I am something other than a title wearing a body. The ballroom heard every word. 300 wolves processing the fact that the Alpha King, 26, undefeated, untouchable, had just confessed the loneliest truth of his reign. Oh, my wolf said, very quietly. Oh, Brinna. He meant every word, and every wolf in this room knows it, including the ones who will use it against him. And I ran. Down the grand staircase, the twilight gown tangling around my ankles, past guards still blinking away the compulsion, too disoriented to stop me. Through the great hall, the kitchens, the service corridors I'd memorized over 2 weeks of pre-dawn baking sessions. Brinna, stop. Think about what you're doing. Every noble in the kingdom just watched the Alpha King confess I'm the most real thing in his life. I'm the biggest political target north of the Sylvain Pass. So your solution is to run through the castle in a ball gown like a deranged Cinderella? We're losing a shoe. We've literally just lost a shoe, Brinna. That shoe cost more than our bakery. I don't care about the shoe. I care about the shoe. That was a nice shoe. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Because underneath the panic about politics and targets and the crushing weight of 300 staring eyes, there was something older and more terrifying. The look on his face when he'd said it. Not the words, the look. The naked, unguarded, helpless certainty of a man who had just spoken the truest thing he'd ever said in front of the worst possible audience and couldn't take it back. He had meant every word, and that was the part I couldn't bear. Because if he meant it, if I was truly the most real thing in his world, then I had the power to shatter him. And I had never wanted power. I had wanted to be small and safe and unremarkable, and instead the moon goddess had handed me the heart of a king and said, Here, try not to break this. The tears came in the stables, the ugly kind, from the deep place where I kept the beliefs I'd never examined. That I was too ordinary to be loved like that, too common to carry that weight. You spent your whole life making yourself small enough to fit a life that was never meant to hold you, my wolf said fiercely. And tonight, a king who has everything told you that you are the most real thing in his world. You can run from that, but you'd be running from the one person who sees you at your actual size. The stable master saddled a mare without questions. I've been here 40 years, he said. Never once saw that boy smile the way he smiled when your cookies showed up in the kitchens. Even the horseman knows, my wolf said as we rode into darkness. A woman in the laundry room told me through our wolf she's been saving linens for our wedding. Monogrammed linens, Brenna. Please stop talking. There are monogrammed linens. Valdrin watched her go, and something inside him went very quiet. His wolf was not quiet. His wolf was a storm. This is a catastrophe. A preventable catastrophe. I told you to tell her about the bond weeks ago. I said, tell her, explain it properly, use words. Did you listen? No. You inspected an oven. You broke her tartlets. You talked about tax code when you meant to talk about her eyes. And now the universe has done it for you. In the worst possible way. In front of everyone. Congratulations. This is your masterpiece of failure. But beneath the wolf's frenzy, in the still, human center of his chest, there was a silence that was worse. The silence of a man watching the one true thing in his life walk away, and knowing it was his fault. Valdrin, Marinth's voice, sharp, cutting through the chaos. She was descending from the dais, her face a mask over what he now recognized as guilt. Let the girl go. This is for the best. She doesn't belong. Mother. His voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. I know what you did. Marinth stopped. The compulsion, woven into the moonfire rite. You intended it for Brenna, to make her confess her doubts in front of the court, to break the bond through shame. 300 wolves, still reeling from their own unwanted confessions, turned to watch. Marinth lifted her chin. She was many things, cold, calculating, relentless, but she was not a coward. I did what I believed was necessary to protect the crown. You weaponized a sacred rite. You violated the goddess's ceremony, and you hurt someone who has done nothing to deserve it. His voice cracked, a hairline fracture in granite. He looked at his mother, and for the first time, she saw not her son, but the unyielding ruler of the Iron Fang. I understand why you are who you are. But this ends now. You will not touch Brenna. You will not scheme against her. If you cannot accept that, you are welcome to retire to the Greymane Estates with full honor and every comfort. Marinth stared at him, and for the first time in Valdrin's memory, her composure cracked. Not completely. She was still Marinth Greymane, but enough. Your father never looked at me the way you look at her, she whispered, and her voice was not venomous. It was small. Not once. In 30 years. She is in pain, his wolf said, and for once the general's voice was gentle. Old pain. The kind that calcifies into strategy because feeling it would be unbearable. We cannot fix that. But we can refuse to inherit it. She turned and left, her back straight, her steps measured, and Valdrin felt, alongside his fury, a grief so old it had no bottom. Grieve for her later, his wolf said gently. Find our mate, now. My horse, no guard. Jorik studied his face, then, quietly. She took the north road. The stable master saw her go. Valdrin was out of the ballroom before the sentence was finished. He rode hard through the night, following the road to Thornfeld, following the scent that the night wind carried to him, cinnamon and salt tears, and the bright, fierce note of her wolf, frightened and furious and impossibly brave. He didn't ride like a king. He rode like a man chasing the only thing that mattered. Faster, his wolf urged, and for once there was no posturing, no strategic commentary, just raw, desperate need. She thinks she's alone. She thinks we let her go. Faster! He found her as the sky was beginning to lighten in the east. Thornfeld was a dark cluster ahead, and the warm glow of a single window, her bakery, was a beacon in the gray dawn. Light in the window meant she was baking. Baking at dawn meant she was hurting. He was beginning to understand the grammar of her grief. He dismounted, his heart hammering with a violence that made his war-trained steadiness feel like a joke. Dalla burst through my bakery's back door an hour after I'd arrived, wild-eyed, wearing a nightgown and one boot. You're alive. Good. I heard from the merchant's son, who heard from a guard, who heard from a washerwoman, That you threw a shoe at the Alpha King and fled on horseback. I didn't throw a shoe. I lost a shoe. There's a difference. Less important than the overall situation. She grabbed my shoulders. The entire village has been up since midnight. There are rumors ranging from, she cursed the king, to, they're secretly married, to, from old Herrick at the tavern, the cookies were enchanted and she's a pastry witch. A pastry witch, my wolf said. I want that on our headstone. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which for Dala was a religious experience. He said you're the only person who makes him feel real, and you ran. Yes. She pinched the bridge of her nose in a gesture so eerily reminiscent of Jorik that I wondered if exhaustion with me was communicable. Brinna, I love you. You are my best friend and the most talented baker I know. But sometimes you are the most spectacularly stupid person I have ever met. He said the truest, most vulnerable thing a man can say, in front of the worst possible audience, and your response was to sprint. A knock at the front door. Dala peeked through the window, turned back with an expression half terror, half unholy glee. It's him, on your doorstep, in the fancy clothes. He looks like he hasn't slept. This is the most romantic thing that has ever happened in Thornfeld, and that includes when Herrick's goat brought him flowers. She grabbed her boot and headed for the back. I'm leaving. Fix this. I swear on the goddess, if you don't fix this, I will come back and fix it for you, and you will not enjoy my methods. She vanished. I opened the door. The Alpha King stood in the gray dawn light, windswept, still in his solstice finery. He looked wrecked, not broken. The Alpha King didn't break, but cracked in the places where the man was showing through. He rode through the night, my wolf said, and her voice ached. No guard, no escort, just him. He came alone, Brinna. The most powerful wolf in the kingdom is standing on your doorstep, and he looks terrified you'll close the door. Brinna, he said, and he didn't command. He didn't explain. He just stood there, stripped of everything, and let me see the damage. You shouldn't be here. Every hour you spend chasing a common-born baker is another weapon they can use against you. Then let them use it. I have fought wars with less at stake than this. He stepped closer, not into my space, to the edge of it, asking permission with his proximity. I know what you believe about yourself, he said, his voice quiet, raw, the voice of a man speaking without any armor at all. I know you think you're small, ordinary, that you don't have the blood or the breeding that this world demands. I know because I saw it in your eyes when you looked at that ballroom and thought, I don't belong here. My throat closed, and I am telling you, I, who have sat in council with every high-born alpha in this kingdom, who have weighed the worth of powerful wolves since I was a boy, I have never met anyone who belongs more. He reached out slowly and took my hand. My fingers were flour-dusted. I had baked in the dark when I'd gotten home, because baking was what I did when the world was too much. His thumb traced a line through the white powder on my knuckle. Power is not the ability to make someone kneel, he said. It is the willingness to stand beside someone and say, I see you as you are, and I am not going anywhere. That is what I am saying to you. Brinna, my wolf said, and her voice was shaking. If you don't keep this man, I am filing for separation from you and bonding with his wolf independently. I'm not even sure that's possible, but I will find a way. The compulsion, I said, my voice cracking. You said I was the only person. That was the truth. The magic didn't create anything new. It just removed my ability to keep it quiet. Something broke in me. Not the bad kind, the kind where the walls come down because you finally realize they were keeping out the very thing you needed to survive. I don't know how to do this, I whispered. I don't know how to be what you need. You already are. You have been since the moment you walked up to me with a tin of cookies and refused to be afraid. I was afraid, my wolf murmured. But we did it anyway. That's the part that matters. I squeezed his hand. His fingers tightened around mine, warm and real. Okay, I said. Okay, but I have conditions. A flicker of surprise in his silver eyes. Conditions? We have conditions? My wolf said, sounding delighted. We're negotiating with the Alpha King, on our doorstep, in our pajamas. I have never been prouder of us. I keep my bakery, here in Thornfeld. I am not just a queen or a mate or a political instrument. I am a baker, and that doesn't stop. Done. I am not going to learn to curtsy properly. I nearly took out a sugar bowl last time. The corner of his mouth twitched. Acceptable. Millet comes with me, my cat. He's terrible and he sheds on everything, and he once ate an entire wheel of cheese in one sitting. Non-negotiable. The cat is welcome. Ask about the kitchen, my wolf urged. Make sure they're not giving our kitchen to someone else. That oven is ours. I've bonded with that oven. And if you're going to build me a pillow fort, I looked at him and for the first time let myself smile. It better have a snack drawer. The Alpha King of the Iron Fang laughed, a real, full-bodied laugh that echoed through the quiet street and startled a pigeon off my roof. Then he pulled me into his arms and his mouth found mine in a kiss that tasted like cold night air and coming home. Finally, my wolf sighed, and for once, there was no sarcasm at all. 6 months later, I stood before the Great Council beside Valdrin, a distinction Elder Theron had accepted after I beat him in 3 consecutive rounds of 5-card stud. The transition from village baker to the Alpha King's mate who is slowly converting the monarchy to a baked goods-based governance model had not been smooth. There had been incidents. There was the time I accidentally used treaty parchment for a scone recipe, and Lord Dravith, his challenge quietly withdrawn after receiving a trade council seat and a batch of orange cardamom scones, asked very seriously if the scones were any good. They were. Relations improved markedly. There was the time Millet fell asleep on the Iron Fang throne, and 3 guards had a whispered argument about whether removing him constituted treason. Valdrin resolved the situation by holding court with a cat on his seat, which he ignored with such complete disregard that it actually enhanced his authority. There was the time Marenth, during one of her increasingly frequent visits, caught me teaching Valdrin to make bread. He was kneading dough with the concentration of a man disarming a siege engine, flour absolutely everywhere. Marenth stood in the doorway and said, without a trace of warmth, "He gets that from his father. Aldrich couldn't bake either. Burned water once." She left, and I stood there blinking, because that was the closest thing to a shared joke she'd ever offered. Her second note to me, "Send more cookies. The estates have no competent baker. This is not a request," lived in my apron pocket next to the first. Revka Sylvain had departed as the newly appointed keeper of the old songs. The trade alliance was restructured as a commercial agreement rather than a marriage pact, less romantic and more sustainable, which, as Jork pointed out, was true of most things that actually worked. Before us now, the alphas of the River Pack and the Stone Pack were mid-argument about a boundary dispute that had been festering for decades. He moved the marker stone. Your wolves dammed the eastern creek and flooded my hunting grounds. I held up a hand. They stopped. Not because I was alpha. I was an omega, common-born, with no political lineage and flower permanently embedded under my fingernails. They stopped because over 6 months, I had earned something no bloodline could bestow. Trust. Omega to omega, voice to voice, I had sat with their grievances and their fears, and I had listened. And sometimes listening was the most powerful thing in the room. "Here's what we're going to do," I said. "First, cookies. I have snickerdoodles and I have lemon shortbread. Choose wisely, because your choice will determine my opinion of your judgment." A ripple of laughter. The River Alpha took a snickerdoodle. The Stone Alpha, after a moment of deliberation that suggested he understood the stakes, chose the shortbread. Shortbread man has taste, my wolf approved. River Alpha is a traditionalist. Good to know. Now, I continued, you're going to talk to each other, not at each other. And you're going to remember that this creek and this marker stone have been here longer than both your packs. The question isn't who was here first. The question is how you share what's here now. They talked. It wasn't pretty, these things never were. But by the end of the hour, they had a framework. Not a solution, but a beginning. And beginnings were where I did my best work. Valdrin caught my eye across the table. His face was composed, kingly, revealing nothing to the court. But through the bond, that warm, constant thread between us that had deepened from a spark to a river, I felt his wolf, rumbling with a pride so vast it barely fit inside him. Our mate, his wolf said, with the gravity of a coronation, is magnificent. Later that night, under a sky thick with stars, we ran. He shifted first, a process that still took my breath away, not because of the violence of the transformation, but because of the beauty. One moment a man, the next a wolf the color of storm clouds and silver, massive and powerful, his gray eyes holding the same quiet intensity they held in human form. I followed. My shift was less dramatic. My wolf was smaller, leaner, honey gold where his was gray, built for speed rather than force. She settled into our shared body with a sigh of pure satisfaction. Finally, she said, out of the kitchens, out of the council chamber, out of the dress code. No one asking about pastry, no one bowing, just trees and dirt and the deeply satisfying urge to bite something. We raced through the royal woods, a blur of silver and gold under the pale moon. He was stronger, but I was faster, darting between the ancient oaks, doubling back to nip at his heels, leading him on a chase that was not about dominance, but about joy. At one point, I feinted left, ducked right, and shot between his legs while he was mid-stride. He stumbled, recovered, and I could feel through the bond his wolf's reaction, a mixture of outraged dignity and deeply reluctant admiration. She is extremely agile, his wolf said, with the tone of a military commander forced to complement an enemy's strategy. We will not acknowledge the between-the-legs maneuver. It did not happen. We maintain our dignity. Your dignity is in the ferns where I left it, my wolf shot back, and I could have sworn his wolf huffed. In a moonlit clearing, he caught me, not with force, with patience. He simply stopped running, sat down in the silver grass, and waited. And I, because I was learning that the most powerful thing in the world was sometimes just being still, circled back to him. We lay together in the clearing, breathing hard, the forest alive around us with the sounds of a world that was bigger and wilder and more beautiful than any court or castle. He pressed his great head against mine. I pressed back. I love you, his wolf said, and the words carried a quiet, unshakable certainty. Not the giddy love of discovery, but the settled love of someone who had chosen and chosen again and would keep choosing every morning for the rest of forever. Tell him, I said to my wolf, that his mate says the snack drawer better be stocked when we get home. She says she loves you too, my wolf relayed, in her own insufferable way. And somewhere in the iron hold, Jorik poured himself a glass of wine, put his feet up on the desk, and enjoyed the first quiet evening he'd had in 6 months. He had just opened a book when a messenger arrived. The cat had gotten into the ceremonial butter again, and 2 guards were in a standoff about who had to retrieve him. Jorah closed the book, finished the wine, and went to deal with it. Because someone had to. He paused in the corridor, though, and allowed himself a moment. The castle was different now. Louder, messier, permanently dusted with flour in places that should not have flour. There were cookies in the council chamber, and a cat on the throne, and the most feared Alpha King in generations had been caught twice reading poetry in the kitchens when he thought no one was looking. It was chaos. But it was the good kind, the kind that comes from a place being lived in rather than merely ruled from. It wouldn't last. It never did. But that was the thing about building a life with someone. It wasn't about the quiet moments or the chaos. It was about having someone beside you who made both worth showing up for. I was a common-born Omega baker from a village no one remembered. He was the alpha king of the Iron Fang, 26 years old and still learning that strength and softness could live in the same body. We were, by every metric that mattered to the world we'd been born into, impossible. And we were, by the only metric that mattered to us, exactly right. Also, my wolf added, we still have flour under our fingernails. Some things even a mate bond can't fix.